All right, this is a regular meeting of the Norwich Planning Commission. We're going to get started. We have 5 members in attendance at Tracy Hall and 2 remotely. So thank you, everybody, for making the time, and we will try to get something done here. I'm going to start with the agenda, and we can take a motion to approve that, and that'll let us talk about it.
So moved. Second.
All right. Any comments, questions on the agenda? Stuart?
Yeah, so I'm going back to what I wrote in terms of which you folks have not seen, unless you read the packet carefully. So it seems to me that correspondence ought to include what the actual correspondence is. I wrote a couple of emails and they were not noted in correspondence. So I would like to see in the future to have all correspondence, regardless of whether it comes from a PC member or whether it comes from the public, or whether it's related to what is on the agenda or not related to on the agenda. I'd like to see that included in correspondence. And I think that would be helpful. So
question to the commission then, and I don't have a preference necessarily. I asked Pam to put the things that Stuart had included into the packet proper, if you will, not correspondence, because they applied to an agenda item. That is the only reason. Now, to Stuart's point, I think we need in the packet to be very clear which agenda item are the different elements in the packet reference to. But if we assume that is done, if it says this sewage report or town survey applies to agenda item number 5, then to me that's an appropriate place to put it rather than correspondence. But I'm totally open to other people's thoughts. Jeff?
Hey, Jan, when we get to correspondence, can we talk about this?
Yeah, that was my intention. Was I have it noted in to talk about it as a process question on correspondence. So we'll do that, Stuart. Any comments on the agenda itself?
okay with me.
Okay. All those in favor of moving with the agenda as stated?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Aye.
Thank you. Public comments. Do we have public comments for items not on the agenda? We will certainly have time for public comments for agenda items. This would be for anything not on the agenda.
There you go.
We have Elisa Close in the audience. Lisa Close.
You're welcome to speak if you'd like.
I would, but I don't have to speak tonight, and
You don't have to.
I could whittle it down so you don't have to listen so long. I have some thoughts about development, but I may be long. I have flair for verbosity, and I may be long-winded. I can shorten it up.
Why don't, if it's about development, then I would suggest you listen to the conversation during that agenda item. And if you want to add something at that time, then feel free.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I do not see hands raised from anybody remote, so we're going to move on. I put this item on chair report, and I did this somewhat, and I had a chair memo before in the packet. I changed that to chair report, basically to buy myself another week's worth of time every cycle. If it's a chair report a chair memo that goes in the packet, then I have to be done with it on Wednesday before the meeting. If it's a chair report designed to be given in real time, then I have an extra number of days to do some work. So that's why I switched to this method. So I just wanted to report on several things that I was chartered to work on or have been working on. We talked about finances and whether or not there was a surplus, and whether or not because we weren't burning money for staff, we had other options. So I talked with, I both checked the budget, and then I got some feedback from Marcia as well. The end of the fiscal year, the books don't even close for 45 days after June 30th. So the audit for last year will be quite a while in coming. So in terms of the question of do we have a surplus from last year, that's not something we're going to know for a while. My guess is that it then goes into essentially an undesignated, or, you know, it's not going to be useful to point out something from last year to justify spending in this year for us. That's my sense. But anyway, the audit won't be done for a while. The town meeting budget that was passed in March, that then for planning has about $160,000 for planning, of which about $100K of that is salary and benefits for the open position, or what it calls out as director. So if I do the math, that's $8,000 or $9,000 a month of unspent budgeted money starting July 1 until we hire somebody. So I keep that in mind. So we don't have, that's the kind of amount that we could theoretically justify to help us augment lack of staff. In terms of the logistics, if we wanted to say get a specific statement of work out of Two Rivers and get them to help with something specific, or any other contractor, we would work with the town manager, interim town manager, to define a statement of work and a proposal, and then that would go to the select board for approval of the expenditure. And then we would justify that by saying, hey, look, we've been without staff for 2 or 3 months. That means we got $30,000 in our budget to spend, ... So that's the status from what I could tell around finances. Are there any comments and questions on that topic, Vince?
How does Kyle's contributions attribute to that? Is he being compensated at all, or is that?
He is. So you're right in the sense that there's an admin line in that 160 that is Pam's time. So Kyle, who's at 8 hours a week now, two mornings a week, would be coming out of that staff or director or admin, not the admin, but the that position. So yeah, that would take a little bit out of that money, because theoretically we would not need him if we had hired into the position. Stu?
So I'd just like to back up and talk about number 3, the town fair, which everyone knows, has been going on for an awfully long time. It's a wonderful event. Kids, grandchildren, even adults have a ball. And I think they're still looking for people who would like to be dunked. So if you have a yen to get wet and to get dunked, don't hesitate. And the only reason I mention this is I'm a Lion, and part of this effort to have a great fair, and it's always been a great fair. So,
well, to that end, I did my part, and if you have a decent pitching arm, 2:30 on Saturday, I will be sitting on the hot seat or the cold seat, depending on the temperature of the water.
It's likely not to be hot. Unfortunately.
So yes, that is.
So
yes, I would certainly encourage anybody who wants to take it for the town, sign up.
So I did have a question also about the surplus or the money that is allocated for. Would you mind repeating, Jan, for those of us who are not paying as close attention as we should have, in terms of what we have as a surplus, what the amount is?
In terms of last year, we don't know. They close the books 45 days after the end of the fiscal year. That means it will be mid-August before they close the books on the last fiscal, and then they do the audit on the closed books. So it will be a number of months before last year's audit is official.
Well, no, my question is, what typically, if there is a typically, is the number that has been paid in the past, even though it may be increased in the present? And what amount is there over and above what might be typically spent for us to work with for other things?
To get
If you know.
contractors and regional commissions and so forth like that, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not much from, I can look at the budget, but I think there was, it may actually be the regional commission dues or whatever you call it, but there's some number of thousands of dollars in there, like 5,000 or 6,000 that say Two Rivers Regional Commission. And I don't know whether that's for services rendered just as being a member of the commission, or I don't know if you know, Jeff, but there isn't a lot of money. If you look at 160K, 100 of it is for the director. Then there's 30K for kind of admin staff and benefits, $3,000 for GIS, $6,000 for Two Rivers. I mean, there's not a great deal of money to work with, I think is the short answer.
Thank you.
All right. So that's the fiscal side. I think as we talked tonight about getting work done and what we need, we'll figure out what we can do as a commission and what we might need help with, and then we'll take that route when we need it. The next step on the try to find the planning and zoning files, which is definitely a bit of forensic digging, which has made a little but not much progress. Pam is working, she's taking screenshots of various nested folders that are in the planning and zoning on the files on the server. I have those, I'm looking through those, and then once I know kind of where to dig, I'll go in and get on Kyle's computer and dig. There are things like a big block of work on zoning regulation or zoning amendments drafts from 2017 and 2018, a bunch of different sections that were rewritten in that time frame. Things like that. There are minutes of when you met with the DRB in 2021, where the DRB says there's some vague things in the zoning regs we'd love to see clarified. That one specifically, I would love it if anybody knew more detail, like, oh, there is a document that the DRB wrote up that said, here are the comments of what's vague and bothering us that needs clarity. I haven't seen anything, but anybody, Ernie, do you know anything about something like that?
Well, we were discouraged from doing that sort of thing. There is a little bit that was done by a couple of people, myself included, but it kind of went nowhere because they really wanted Rod to do the whole thing, and we would just approve it and rubber stamp it.
Yeah. Hey, Jan.
Jeff?
So I, as someone who is a business practitioner with a server who has access to anyone's email, I'm wondering why someone isn't jumping onto Rod Francis' email and providing the information that he gave the Planning Commission with respect to the 13 or 14 or 15 zoning districts that we were discussing before his departure. So I don't mean to be flip, but why, I'm not even sure how to frame this. This seems so strange to me. Why someone can't log in as Rod Francis and open up the world.
Well, and there are also, I'm sorry, whoops.
Go ahead, Chris.
So we have an IT guy, and if I remember correctly, I know they've switched the company, but there's an IT guy that has access to, I believe, everyone's computer. I don't know if that's true or not. And he supposedly he had all the passwords. So I would, at least that's what happened in the lister's office, that if we forgot our passwords, they can kind of circumvent that. But it would seem that somebody in the town would have that ability.
Yeah.
I think Jeff is right. I think it's a great idea. But can I ask one other question?
Sure.
Jeff, you and Ernie were did the DRB actually give you a document or was it a conversation?
It was a document that Rod had written, and like, for instance, I didn't like a lot of it, so I was
Well,
given a week.
Well,
Go
I'm
through
not
it.
asking, okay, so I'm not saying what Rod did. What I'm asking you is there any reason why we shouldn't approach the DRB and ask them to hand us the original document that they may have passed on to Rod? I'm just wondering how the
Yeah, and
two.
Chris, I'll talk to this later on, but I have reached out to Patrick, who is the new chair of the DRB, just as an introductory, we will be reaching out, soliciting input and so forth. So he hasn't written back to me yet, but I've made the first point of contact to the new chair of the DRB. Linda Gray on Zoom, you had a comment?
Hi, thank you. And I just wanted to, on this topic of the DRB, I happen to be on the DRB now, and I just wanted to suggest that you might find it useful that at the time, so let's say, I guess at least more than a year ago, the DRB had some discussions about what people concerns they may have had about the current zoning regulations, et cetera. And I'm pretty new, and so I did not have much of a collection of those, but I wanted to just suggest to you that in addition to reaching out to our current chair, Patrick, that you might find it useful to talk to our former longtime chair, Arlene Rotman, because I think she would be able to give you like a nice starting point summary of concerns that the DRB has about how certain wording of zoning regs, et cetera.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Linda. That's a good suggestion. The date that the DRB met with the Planning Commission was October 21. So one assumes they had conversations around that to prep. Jeff?
Yeah, and I'm completely baffled, and I'm trying to be nice. So in my office, when someone leaves my office, I have access to, our company has access to their emails. So it seems to me a really simple way to access all of the communication with the Planning Commission would be to access Rod Francis emails. And to the extent those emails are not available, I'm wondering how the select board is dealing with the police to address what's gone on.
So
It seems really simple to me, and I'm completely.
it does. I have danced around that a little bit in this forensic activity, not head on, other than to hear, yes, we have access to some of what was on Rod's computer. I will follow up again with Brennan and Marcia. It's not Pam really. Pam is helping as much as she can. It's a question of who has access to what and whether. I don't think it's as simple as someone can sign on as Rod and get everything. I think there's some complexities that they aren't willing to talk about that make it harder. But I will try that again. I know. I know. Well, to get to the second point, which begs the same question, in terms of maps, I said, okay, I want the GIS. The GIS maps, I assume, have a certain extension so that you can tell a GIS file from a Word doc. Where are the maps that were used in the town plan? And now, of course, Pam can pull up the PDFs that went into the town plan, but has no idea about GIS compatible files. When I then had Kyle go look, Kyle talked at the regional commission, whether or not the regional commission had any copies of or any knowledge of the maps that went into our town plan. And the answer he got digging into that was no. So the regional commission does not have those files. He is now in a second round of looking in our server for GIS compatible original files that are the maps from the town plan. And the first go round of that look didn't find them. Two Rivers is perfectly willing to help us with mapping, but they don't have these files to hand back over to us. And it is baffling, I agree. And we need to see what we can get and then work with what we got. But I will take another round at it with specifically Brennan, maybe Brennan and Miranda, since she was around for the whole thing. But that's where it stands in terms of digital information, and clearly the maps are very specific to look for. Jeff?
Yeah, Jan, my recollection is the planning commission decided through its empowerment of Rod to not engage the RPC at all. So again, to the extent someone like Pete Fellows is given access to Rod Francis emails or somebody else with IT experience, we'd find all this. And I'm befuddled. So I'll
Well,
just
I think
say,
if nothing else, it's a time sink there to dive into the emails of somebody who's looking at everybody's emails and go back 2 years and dig through and see, back to 2020 and so forth. It's going to be a lot of time. I haven't put that much time in. I haven't pushed hard enough to try to get that access, but once we can
with respect, having
go ahead.
Yeah, having to do with, having dealt with folks who've left our office and looking at thousands of emails, it's really quick. Click, subject, done. And it might be a couple of days worth of effort, but that's not that big a deal. It's just having access to the digital record, which seems, so if I understand correctly, we're not allowed, the town is not allowing us access to, or I'm not sure how to frame this. It sounds like Rod Francis emails are not accessible.
That the second way of putting it is more accurate from what I got. I'm not feeling it blocked in the Marcia and Brennan point of view. I'm feeling like the access, the availability isn't there. But I need to, I will work to confirm that specifically and get just an answer that's clear to say, okay, this seems to be a sensible path forward. Why can't we take it and push? Chris?
Well, no, I'm just wondering if anybody would actually know this, because I could sense why they might be reluctant to let the IT guy just dive in, is if he used the same computer as a ZA and then moved it to the town manager position, then there is a lot of information as the town manager that is probably, they do not want the public to see any legal stuff. So I don't know if perhaps they can't separate, if he didn't have two separate computers, then I could see that there would be a reason for them to be much more concerned about just letting anybody go on there.
Right. So it may be something like that. It may be something in HR things with Rod leaving, but I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. So, but I think the short answer is the original maps, we're going to go to the RPC for a next round of maps and not necessarily be able to find those. I had one more quick topic on the chair report, which is simply to report that the Affordable Housing Subcommittee planning grant for the new Boston Road project, they got pushed back from Brennan that the planning, that the town manager department just didn't have the bandwidth to support a grant at this time. And for that reason, they bumped it to the next cycle, which is, I think, February, 6-month bump. So they will come back to us. What Jeff Lubell wanted to do was come back, do a little bit of work with the Planning Commission to get the application, the grant application, in a good place before he looped back to the select board. But there is time because it's February now, not September. So just an update on that. Okay. That's what I have. Jeff? Jeff?
Yeah, I think Stu put his finger up before I raised my hand. Sorry. As a comment about town manager and planning grants, et cetera, this town has a what is the word I want to use? A very robust record of engaging citizens to manage projects and planning grants with limited staff availability. And I don't see why that couldn't be the case in this setting. I think in our recent select board and staff paradigm, there was a shift to no longer engage volunteer citizens in the community to assist, nor for that matter, local firms to assist with projects that may be needed to accomplish what needs to be done. But in this case, frankly, the select board could say, hey, Jeff Lubell, you can manage this planning grant hypothetically, and we really don't need much involvement for the town manager. I understand this would be ultimately a town grant, but having been involved with the implementation of multiple town grants locally, not administered by the town manager, I would hope that we can get back to a place where we can consider the fiscal benefits and the volunteerism of our community.
Right. Yeah, I hear you and I agree with you. I think that the word came to me from Jeff Lubell. He said, based on what we're hearing, this is what we want to do. So how hard the pushback was from the town manager and how much of it was a committee decision, I don't know. I got it as a decision made by the committee. Stuart?
So I just would like to express a hope that when, and if, I'm assuming when, this grant comes back to us, that we look very closely at it and examine it from a perspective of line items so that we try and arrive at something that I think and that you think is realistic in terms of cost. I don't believe that 65 grand for what is being asked is realistic at all. And I understand the vote that was taken. And I understand that people want to support affordable housing, as do I. As far as I know, the only person who's formed a nonprofit here in Norwich called Norwich Affordable Housing, Inc. I think it deserves a closer look and that's not to say that it should be rejected. What I think it needs is streamlining and a very close look. So thanks for hearing me out.
My understanding from Jeff was that he was planning on taking that back, bringing that back to us, that he was going to go through with the planning commission before he submitted anything either to the town manager or to the select board. So we will see it again.
Well,
Yes.
we have several people who are numbers guys, if I'm not mistaken. And
I intend to inform that. I agree with you.
So, we've got a former developer, largest ski area developer at Killington Ski Area, a guy who's licensed broker since 1974, real estate broker, over 700 closings. So we've got some horsepower to review this, and I think it should be reviewed.
Yeah, so we will get the opportunity. Okay, let's move to the next item on the agenda, which is the Planning Commission work plan. And so I think, what I'd like to get, I'll jump kind of to the goal of tonight. I would like us to be able to parse out at least one and maybe two chunks of work that can be handed to committees, smaller groups of this. I mean, the every 2-week cycle is, in my mind, wants to move to once a month of the full commission, and then committees can meet in the off period and come back to the monthlies. So that's the goal. And you can see on the agenda the kinds of the topics that are coming out of the fog in terms of specific work. But that's the way I'm seeing committees and the whole commission. Is that, do people have thoughts on that? Kind of the function of committees and their relationship to the planning commission as a whole before we get into the topics themselves? Okay. So let's talk. Yeah, John.
Yeah, so by way of example, the planning commission has done the subcommittee thing over the years in various ways, and I think at least Stu and maybe Ernie will recall the rural area subcommittee in the 90s that effectively crafted our subdivision regulations with considerations of the land and proximity to downtown. And I can't remember the name of the other subcommittee that focused on the more urban context of the Cook property, for instance, Route 5 South and Route 5 North. But we had a whole bunch of committee meetings and effort that facilitated the adoption of subdivision regulations and zoning back in the mid to late 90s as an example of some of the subcommittee work.
Yeah. Well, and you can see it in, the documents that Stuart put into the packet are outputs of some deep dive work by smaller groups and to my mind, a committee would be some number of people from the commission and then some number of public, residents, interested residents as a way of expanding that. Could be a select board member, 3 planning commission members, and 2 members of the public. But that kind of, or get the DRB involved, get the other groups involved, conservation commission. So that's the idea. So if we take that, keep that in our minds in terms of crafting those scopes of work. Let's start with the solar siting and the energy plan piece and say, okay, is that, do we have that clear enough that we can hand it off to a smaller group and have them do productive work over a month, 2 months, whatever the charter is? To my mind, at the very least, we have, I could bracket it from dive into the specific question, what does it take? What are the pros and cons of changing that default setting of everywhere in town is default preferred, just looking at that. And then the other extreme would be advocating for doing an enhanced energy plan, an approved enhanced energy plan for the town that would have a pile of work and really change, our influence and standing with state process. So that to me is a pretty big spread. I am perfectly willing to put the topic to a smaller group and have you help define where in that spectrum you want to land. But let's just open up that topic for conversation around how do we give a committee a good chance of success? Chris?
So when we were talking about it's funny because you're right. It's a large topic, but there are some big chunks. And to me, 2 of the big chunks that I kind of see is the ridgeline protection in combination with scenic roads and the lack of the map and updated information. So I don't know. So here's my question. Do you foresee a committee that would just work? I mean, that's a pretty big chunk in itself too. So do you foresee that as being just sort of a part of the whole solar thing? Or do you see that a committee that just has to deal with updating that map and talking, or, I think, I forgot which committee, if it wasn't the Conservation Committee, there was a committee that actually worked on the scenic highway map. At least that's what's on the website. So I guess my question is, are you suggesting that there be a committee that would break it down the best of how they see it might be broken down? Or do you think we should, at this time, kind of parcel out, pun intended, the big chunks of what falls under the preferred siting concerns?
Mm-hmm. In answer to, if you're asking me that question, I would say I'm perfectly willing to let the smaller group define what it wants to take on. If we want to narrow down this topic, we can start with solar siting. We can say we just had some fun with the solar siting issue that I didn't feel like we had the tools in hand to do a satisfying job. And so if we just take that, and to your point, Chris, there were questions about ridge lines. There were questions about definitions of scenic and definitions of development, and so it could be simply a small group to look at the solar siting, the topic of solar siting, and how can we clarify things to put ourselves in a better position next time. Ernie?
One of the things that it strikes me is that all the parts of the regulations, all the parts of the town plan, all have to work together with each other. And there seems to be that indicates like there should be a sequence of where you start and then what happens afterwards. So, for instance, I'm thinking growth and development, which is really land use planning, is kind of the most fundamental aspect of town planning there is. And it would include stuff, it would touch on, for instance, ridge lines and roadways and all the rest of those other things, as well as forest blocks, where you want to have housing, where you want to have wilderness, for want of a better term, conservation areas, so on and so forth. And that would all then affect your siting and all the other issues that are related to planning for instance, solar siting and all of that. So I'm trying to wrap my head around and develop something constructive to say, make a constructive suggestion of how we can do these things in sequence. And I'd suggest that, starting with someone starts on one subcommittee, starts with the plan, the growth and development aspect of things, which that involves all those other things that I was talking about as well. And then while that's happening, something that's more specific, such as solar, it's not a unifying thing. It's one of the details that have to be planned on. That subcommittee could start getting together information, just start literally gathering information, almost, I'm not going to say randomly, but as they get interested and start getting it, build themselves a consensus of what they think they'd like, not knowing at that point how it's going to play into the land use planning and so on, how it's going to play well, if whether it's going to play well. But the thing is, at least they get familiarized with the subject matter, while the land use planning people, who I would suspect have some prior knowledge of the subject, significant prior knowledge, so that they could get started working on it. And then use that same process for other things too, besides solar. I mean, transportation, economic, whatever other divisions, whatever other subcommittees you want to form, or other divisions you want to break the whole thing, the whole situation down into. because each one of those becomes a little bit more granular than, start with have the overall unifying thing get started first.
Yep, yep. Stuart?
So Chris mentioned ridgeline protection and scenic roads. And I would say that we have a basket of things, including steep slopes, vernal pools, and there are other things that are part of our environmental responsibility and environmental concerns that need to be factored into everything that we're talking about. And I'd like to try and move this along and perhaps get to a few people who might be interested in dealing with the subject of solar, some volunteers on this committee. And there are some of us, and I'm thinking of Chris, pardon me, Chris, for saying this, but there are some of us who have done a lot of research and have background in this particular subject. So if we could get to the point of, I'm not sure how many people you want to put on each of these smaller committees or how many you think is appropriate. But I think when you talk about solar, I think that Chris ought to be one of them. Sorry, Chris.
Stuart, I do have a question.
Yes, Chris.
So can I ask this is more of an organizational, not content. I know that we have to be super, super careful about the OML. So this is going to go back. This is an OML question. And I'm really curious, and Jeff, you and Ernie would probably know this better than with the planning commission breaking down into subcommittees. I know we have to adhere to the OML. So if we have a meeting, it has to be posted and go through all those procedures. But I guess my question really comes down to, you're the chair of this meeting, Jan, and you do it beautifully. And Vince does a fabulous job with minutes. But our conversation is sort of very organized and directed. So here's my question. When you guys have broken down into committees in the past, does it become a more free-for-all kind of conversation, or does it still have this? Sometimes I wonder that I'm almost sorry that the OML exists, because everybody seems to be so afraid. I called it the chokehold. Everybody's so afraid to step out of line. So I guess when you guys have had meetings in the past, are they free for all?
Jeff?
So I don't know that I'm going to pick up on Chris's characterization beyond addressing the OML. I'm not the least concerned about the OML, and our affordable housing subcommittee is an example. And so hypothetically, if Ernie and Stu and Chris said, we want to be a part of this subcommittee, and hypothetically, if folks in the public wanted to join and say, we want to be part of that as well, essentially the subcommittee, someone in the subcommittee needs to say, okay, Pam, this is when we're going to either meet in person or Zoom, and here's our agenda. We're just going to have a chat. And then someone's got to post some minutes, and it can be, we chatted about these three things, and it can be 4 sentences for that matter, all as long as it's published within the appropriate timeframes required by the law. So you can talk about anything you want. There's no constraint. This agenda actually that we have tonight actually promotes a free-for-all. I would say that our planning commission discussions today are open, and we're almost brawling compared to where we were. And I'm saying this in the context that this is no longer a staff-driven process, but it's a commission member participation process. So I'm not saying good or bad, although I'm sure you know what I think. All of that said, I agree with Stu. So whoever wants to be on this subcommittee, I don't care if it's 2 people, 3 people, it can be 4 people, it doesn't matter. It's all going to be published anyway. Publish it, invite the public, engage in whatever topics folks want to talk about, Jan, given the broad parameters that you offered. Then come back to the planning commission, as infrequently or as frequently as needed to say, this is where we think we should go.
Yeah, I think to Jeff's point, I would agree. It can be a more informal version of the same thing. The time steps are the same, the minutes and so forth, but everything shrinks down in terms of scope or formality. So I don't think that should be seen as a burden at all. I do want to not lose Ernie's statement, because I do think it's important for us. We're going to have to parallel process. And so how do we parallel process in a way without getting tied up in weird redundant feedback loops where we just don't have the right thing ready for when we need it. So I think we should keep that in mind, but I don't want to then, spend 3 more months in the full committee talking about how best to parallel process. I do want to spin off some real things, work soon. Ernie?
Well, at one time, the town had done a number of inventories of various, I think it was basically natural resources, but I'm not 100% sure if that's all it was. And even if it was just natural resources, we could go and try to do some other inventories. But that concept of inventories, maybe those inventories are even still around and available to work with, because they had, they for instance, took account of, for instance, scenic roads. They took account of ridgeline stuff, vernal pools, that kind of stuff. And the thing is that could be a very helpful bunch of tools, if they still exist, to start with. That they may need adjustment. Some of those things may be paved over. Who knows what's happened to the items in the inventories. There may be more to add, more new stuff to add. All of that's just good stuff. But the Planning Commission should take advantage of all that work that's been done, because it'll help. And it'll give people direction, I think, too. And it'll certainly give them ideas, if nothing else.
Yep. And there are, I know if you dig into any of the GIS mapping that comes down from the state and then is fed by the regional commissions, yeah, pretty much every vernal pool in the state is mapped in GIS, and then they build on that every time somebody puts new stuff in. So there's a huge amount of information we can access. Stuart?
Couldn't agree more with Ernie. And if my recollection serves, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, the Conservation Commission established all of these.
Yeah, they did.
And they should still be available. I haven't seen them recently.
Well, it was 30 years ago. I was on the commission.
There you go.
It was 30 years ago.
But those resources are there. And it is most appropriate and most helpful, I think, if we go and utilize those resources.
Yeah, but Jan's also right. They eventually ended up being added to state maps and stuff like that. That was sort of the intent also, not just use of the town, but it's there.
Yeah. Bob, did you have something?
Yeah, I just say that maybe for the start of it, if each group could have some sort of mandate of focusing on the inventories and resources, or at least a specific relevant small question to kind of keep it, as Chris says, you could get, or suggests you could get down, go down some rabbit hole, or really just become a full session rather than an agenda driven meeting. I think for the short term, really appreciating Ernie's comment that the planning and land use might drive all of this. In the short, maybe for the beginning, the mandate for each group should just be, what do we have, what has been done, and what are the tools available.
Yeah. Jeff?
Yeah, for the solar thing, I think, Jan, to pick up on what you said and what I infer from folks is that our toolkit is somehow lacking. So to the extent we have a subcommittee, what is it we think is lacking? And I just want to say, I think looking at wetlands is a red herring. Because the state controls wetlands, and the project that was presented to us did not impact wetlands, nor did it impact 50-foot buffers for that matter, et cetera. So I guess to me, the question is, what are the concerns? Identify those and then say, okay, to the extent our citing policy needs to be changed, what concerns might affect how that changes?
I agree.
And so even though I don't want to be on that committee necessarily, I would like to advise that committee with things like wetlands, because it is a complete red herring at this. That topic is a red herring to me.
I agree.
Well, to take to generalize, I think, on the committees, which is a good way to think about. We're not talking about sort of building a little lifeboat, putting 3 or 4 people in it and shoving them off for 6 months. I would expect, what we want is people who are interested in a particular topic, who are then going to do the groundwork. We'll skip a meeting once, we'll go to every other meeting. So there's some time for people to dig into topics, as Bob said, understand the inventory as it is meaningful for your topic. Understand the state regulations and what the regional commission does for that topic, and then come back to the full commission with framed questions, or here are 3 ways we could go. Let's talk about which of those 3, so that's in broad strokes what I would picture. And so it's because you're doing it that way, you're identifying a small group of people who want to dig deep into this on a parallel course. We don't have to know beforehand what it's gonna do. We're setting up the process so that, if you look at the 3 that are just listed there and in the agenda, and one of them is for the zoning regs, not for the town plan, but the growth and development one, to Ernie's point, is really the land use, what should get built where and why, and how do we decide. That's a topic. Energy plan and solar siting, and I know Jeff's been talking about, from the zoning regs point of view, ADUs, multifamily. How do you talk about how that works to basically bubble density up in the middle of what you already got? So pictured as who wants to spend time digging into these issues and then bringing that thoughtful perspective back to the commission. That's what we're talking about. Chris?
So Ernie had a great idea when we finished with Upper Loveland, that I forgot how you worded it, but it was sort of like what do you call it when a project ends and you're going to do sort of a not
Well, you
forensic.
can call it a post-mortem, but we didn't quite die. We didn't quite die, so you call it lessons learned.
Okay, so of course post-mortem, and I had sent some information to you, Jan, but I had sort of looked at everything that the PUC had said. So this is a suggestion, and again, I'm totally into, like, I want to go after ridge lines and scenic views or scenic roads, because that was one of the things that PUC brought up. But it's almost like if a few of us want to meet and do that post-mortem in just one session and do a roundtable of what were the things the PUC were saying that are relevant to us, and where some of those big things were. Jeff was talking about macro elements. Is it really going up to the town plan? Is it going up to this? Is it going up ridge lines? Is it going up this? So to me, I don't want to forget the fact that the post-mortem, in a way, one committee meeting could just be a roundtable, like, really, what were those? And we wrote some of them down. I know we discussed it. So I don't know if it needs to be done, if we've already really essentially done a post-mortem or not, but
I would love, and you saw, it's a very good point, and I think that may be the easiest charter for that committee to take on first. You saw, I don't know if people read the select board packet for tomorrow night. Marcia did a 2.5 pages in detail about what is, at least some of it is her postmortem of the Upper Loveland from the select board's point of view. And so, but I wonder whether we have, whether the committee takes on the task of basically organizing a broader postmortem that says, we are the subcommittee of the Planning Commission. This is a topic that is near and dear to our hearts. And the first thing we want to do is have a postmortem lessons learned conversation around this and solicit the Conservation Commission, the Select Board, the residents and neighbors that have plenty to say about it, but stick to the, we're trying to talk about town plans and regs and things that are in our purview, as we mentioned in the talk, but that could be the first activity of that committee, is organizing a postmortem on a fairly broad, with a fairly broad group of people.
Yeah, and again, I say that because there were 4 main things we were talking about. Language was one in the regs that it's already, the state's already said that we have to change our regs from shall to must. And that was some of the things the PUC said. I just remember, and again, I don't know how many other members actually slogged through actually went to the PUC and read all the briefs from both sides. And I read the A&R's briefs. I read, the petitioner's brief. I read all the briefs and they were fascinating. The petitioner's brief was actually, I think, one of the most fascinating ones because they were very pointed on how they knew this was going through. And they pointed out where the weaknesses in Norwich existed. So again, I would be more than happy to do a postmortem. But I don't think it should extend for very long. I think it really should just be, do your homework up front, meet once, maybe twice, and then at the end have sort of a pyramid of, where some of the big things are that maybe the next subcommittees can kind of do that. So I thought it was a great idea.
I mean, I would take that and just, put it on the table as we're getting pretty specific about what we want to charter a committee to do, and we can almost birth that one, from what we're talking about. So let's take that and say, okay, we're gonna do that tonight, to say, okay, who wants to take that first pass at it? And again, you can come back to us a month, 2 months later and say, we did the postmortem and we have these 3 forks in the road we might go down. What does the commission think? So, I think this is all very good framing of how we can work doing this. Jeff?
Yeah, looking at the documents, as Chris noted, I was fascinated too, but may have a different view. But so are there folks that want to be a part of this subcommittee? And can we stand it up tonight and they can do their own thing and take a month or 12 months?
Yep. I will. So I think people from this last half hour should have a decent idea what they're stepping into when they raise their hand here. Who's interested in working on the solar siting energy plan, part of the town plan, as a self-guided tour group?
Can you clarify that? Are you talking post-mortem kind of thing, or are you?
Well,
talking-
I think it's a legitimate idea. It's a good idea to say the first thing that this group might take on or use to then shine a light on where to go next would be a post-mortem activity. So I think that, but I don't see any reason why that group would only do a post-mortem and then dissolve. Chances are the same people would then bubble around the ideas that came up and dig into them and keep going. So it's both.
So is it also at the same time, another committee could be working on, addressing ridgeline protection and scenic roads? I mean, is there only going to be one committee, or could there be?
No, so I would say that's the when we say growth and development, and I think land use is a perfectly good term for it, I think we clearly need another group. And at some point we'll leave something for the whole commission to do. I think, yes, there will be another one that we can call growth and development or land use. That would then be in a position to dig into some of those other things you're talking about, Chris.
I would definitely be interested in doing, what are we gonna call it? Preferred site solar postmortem kind of thing, or is it smaller than that?
I mean, I'm just solar siting considerations in the town plan, or, you know, you can, the funnest thing about starting a new group is coming up with the name in your first meeting, so you can figure that out.
How about solar siting subcommittee?
Oh, all right.
Solar
What?
site-
This is,
solar-
I'm okay with that. My only question is, why are these all subcommittees? Why aren't they just committees? But that's a nit.
Because it's a subset of us, John. It has to be a subcommittee, like the Affordable Housing Subcommittee.
Okay, if there's, then you can be the triple S group. That's fine.
Subcommittee. The subcommittee.
So we've got Chris. Who else would like to sign up for that august task?
I can't do it by myself, people. Hello?
Hello. Stuart,
I mean, I just,
Ernie?
Ernie's volunteer.
no, Ernie's not volunteering. Ernie is.
Ernie,
I want to make it clear that I want to be dealing with the land use and planning.
You can do
That's-
both.
Well, I have no problem with both. I don't really want to get too much more stressed out than I already am with town stuff, you know?
Yeah.
I have another thing that I'm stuck doing right at the moment too.
So Ernie's volunteering.
I didn't hear.
I'll be
no,
sort
but
of go between the two for starters.
Yeah, so
Be at
Stuart,
least one more person.
Stuart just
Stuart,
volunteered.
I heard advocacy on Stuart's.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes,
Vince has a technological background. I strongly think that he might be really good for this.
I
Jan,
want.
you can volunteer too.
oh,
Well,
I'll be-
I'm going to, you know, I'm going to be at very least a sort of ad hoc member of these things because I have to keep track, and I have read a lot of those things, but I would like to see at least one other member of the commission sign up to help Chris out here.
Well, like I said, I will sign up and work with it too.
Me
But
too.
I just want to make sure that I'm not excluding myself from what's even more basic for me.
All right. And I heard that from Stuart too. Did I?
You did not.
Oh.
No, I mean, I'm interested in, as I
Oh, okay.
suspect a couple other, I'm interested in the town plan growth and development
Okay.
committee.
All right. So let's take the solar siting subcommittee, and I'll be a part of that with Ernie and Chris. And then let's take that offline, or at least park it for now. And let's talk about land use planning, growth and development, and see if we can, we've got a little bit of time here before we need to move on, but let's see what we can define out of that exercise. Stuart?
So I'd like to volunteer for that group.
So let's open it up a little bit and say, what do we think it is clearly the nub of a town planning exercise, what development happens where and why. So how do we make that into a workable size task? Ernie?
Well, I think just a simple keyword is a good start, which is sustainability. Since that is sort of the root of all planning and environmental, conservation or whatever other words you want to use. And I think that's where we should start.
So take that one step further and tell me how do I use that to tell a small group of people what to work on?
Well, basically, sustainability deals with both the limits of growth and its limits. What basically making sure that there is an equal opportunity down the road for future generations to basically be able to have what current generation has. If we have clean water, they should be able to have clean water too. If we have open land for, recreation and wildlife and so on, they should have it too, and so on and so forth. Sustainability recognizes that what goes up must come down. Nothing is infinite and so on.
Okay, Stuart?
So I think that in the work that we're doing, I think that we need to consider what the majority of the townspeople have said that they would like, which means, and this is hard to do, it means if we can, to park our personal opinions to the side and try and follow what the town has said, if in fact we can figure that out, so that we follow along with that. And I think trying to apply what the townspeople have said, and we have 2 surveys as guidelines, and we conceivably could do a 3rd survey if we think that it's important, necessary, or that the surveys that we have available are outdated. But I think we need to examine the town plan when we talk about sustainability, or when we talk about, where growth should be promoted and or not promoted. We need to examine the town plan as it exists and try and decide where it might be and or should be or could be changed. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I mean, as I was thinking through this is sort of an engineering sort of statement, but the question to my mind is, what problem are we trying to solve? Or what problem are we solving? So it's not just, hey, we're bored, let's go reopen the town plan. We're saying, what's the problem to be solved? And so if, then you say, what do I need to change? So if you're going to advocate for change, then you have to point to some reason for it. And so that's part of what I think is a starting point. Bob?
I'm just wondering if this would lead to some sort of survey of town opinion. And I would say of the couple surveys that were put out there was, just to get to another point that keeps coming up, some lack of precision in language that could lend to argument that, well, if a large group of people say, they don't want the population to change much or the size of the town to change much, is that the same as a group saying we want 0 new houses? Or if they were presented with a questionnaire that said we would like the number of new housing starts in Norwich to be 0, be slightly below Vermont average, be the same, or be slightly above, that might give us a little more specific thing. So maybe if part of it is taking the barometer of what the town thinks and using that as a mandate, perhaps part of the town plan or the land use subcommittee could be reviewing, resubmitting, or reviewing the language of the town survey if we were to do one.
Mm-hmm.
So
We have, just to Stuart's point, in the packet, we have 2 town surveys that Stuart submitted in, one of them, the most recent one being 2018. So again, kind of to what problem are we trying to solve? Another way to put it is what has changed conceivably since 2018? And to Bob's point, look at the survey and say, is the language clear? Are the results clear? Does it tell us what we need to know or not?
I mean, I guess, sorry,
No,
jump in.
go ahead, Bob.
I guess
Go ahead.
kind of what I was getting at, in a lot of surveys, there's sort of a dissonance in them that, people may say they like things as they are, but then also have a laundry list of a new bed and breakfast would be good. We want more restaurants. We want, that's kind of what I saw in the survey was, a schizophrenic, or not schizophrenic, I didn't say that, but a little,
That was well put.
multiple personality to it.
That was
Yeah.
well. I
Yeah,
like it.
well, if you ask 900 people, you're definitely getting multiple
Yeah,
personalities.
well, sure, yeah.
Stuart?
Yeah, so Bob, I think, has rightly pointed out question 6 in the 2018 survey. The question that was asked specifically was, the population in Norwich is currently approximately 3,400 people. What would you like to see happen to the population of Norwich? 55% of the people who responded to this, and there weren't as many people who responded to this 2018 survey as the earlier survey, but 55% of the people said that they would like the population to remain relatively stable. That doesn't mean no growth in my mind, but maybe there's another interpretation.
It's a fuzzy, yeah. I mean, it's a
Maybe-
fuzzy relative. What does that
Maybe
mean to
there's
everyone?
another interpretation. And then there were a couple percent that I've added to the equation here to make it 55% that they would like to see it reduced some. And that the reduced sum, there's no number attached to that, nor is there a number attached to the remain relatively stable. But my interpretation, and maybe it's wrong, but my interpretation is when somebody says they would like to see it remain relatively stable, that's not a no growth statement, I don't think. I think that it's it's something that indicates that they don't want to see a great deal of growth. And how you put numbers on a great deal, or how you put numbers on relatively stable. You could redo this survey with actual numbers to define what remain relatively stable is and reduce sum is, and what 42% of the people who said they'd like to see the population grow some. How much is grow some? And grow significantly. How much is, that was 1% of the people. How much is that? So
Well, it's
anyway,
an interesting, I think to your Bob's point and yours, Stuart, that 53, 55, if you add the 2%, but 53 to 42, with the 42 being grow sum in an undefined way. But again, that's a multiple personality disorder of 472 people.
Vince has had his hand up, and then me, and then Ernie.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Vince.
Addressing the topic of where development would be, I remember someone referencing Rod had done some work in the past of reworking our zoning districts. And I guess that could be something else that we could look into, because it seems like that's definitely an area that can be improved with, especially our commercial area over there being a little wanting. So if anyone has an update on that, I think, Jeff, have you brought that up before?
I have. I'm glad to address that, Vince. But I'm not sure right now so the rural area subcommittee and our other urban subcommittee focused on basically where is the infrastructure, where are the rural areas, and in that context suggested how we may look at growth. I think, not taking sides with Rod either way, but my recollection is Rod was proposing something like a dozen zoning districts, which is something I have an interest in looking at and understanding better what he was proposing throughout the town to contemplate things like accessory dwelling units and multifamily units and possibility of commercial or in-home businesses. But I'd still like to follow up, even though I've answered Vince's question.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
So I think, and I appreciate what Vince said. So it's about looking at, our landscape, for lack of a better way to say it. And if we're looking at sustainability, as someone who's deeply concerned about sustainability doesn't mean just looking at Norwich. It doesn't mean just looking at our region. It doesn't mean looking at just New Hampshire and Vermont. And it certainly doesn't mean buying dirty fuel from other nations while not developing clean fuel sources in our nation. I think our policies need to reflect sustainability, and that is not happening in our nation at this time relative to energy, to be blunt. Things like we talk about affordability, and subsidized housing is affordable housing. Well, that's not true. We're using tax dollars to pay for housing. And I'm not opposed to subsidized housing at all. And so when I say this, folks say, well, you're against subsidized housing. And no, I'm not. But if subsidized housing could build at the same rate that the private sector can build or less, then I'd say we'd be talking about affordability. If we're building subsidized housing at the rate of a half to 100%, 50%, 100%, 200% more than what the private sector is building, that ain't affordable. I don't care even if the taxpayers is paying for it. So what is sustainability? Looking back at, when I looked at Centerra, I wanted to propose living, working, and shopping in a walkable community. Lebanon didn't want housing to coexist with jobs. Norwich doesn't want jobs to coexist with housing. And I'm not saying good or bad, but that's just the nature of where we are. We have promoted a non-sustainable environment for decades in our region and our communities. So my question about sustainability, if we think about, living, working, and shopping in a walkable community, there's a whole bunch that goes into this. In addition to, if we use it, how do we replace it? Beyond our borders, among other things. So, if it's all about, NIMBY stuff, that's not sustainable. We're a gated community, that's not sustainable. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be a gated community. That's not what I'm saying. And I want to think about, when we ask the public what their thoughts are, occasionally I stumble over someone in the public that has some knowledge about development. And I'm saying this politely. Every 3, 4, 5, 600 people I encounter, one person knows something about development. And everybody has an opinion about development. They know all about wetlands. They know all about deer yards and all this other stuff. But when we sit down and talk about what the real issues are, they have no idea what they're talking about. And I'm not saying this judgmentally. It's just our nature as people. So the question ought to be, sort of broadly, to get back to what Bob said, and maybe Vince in a different way, is, to the extent we're thinking about ourselves in a sustainable context, as opposed to a Norwich-centric context, because a Norwich-centric context is not sustainable. What should we be contemplating? And that's where I come back to things like zoning considerations. We have homes here on Main Street that could accommodate multiple families or multiple apartments, but our zoning doesn't allow it. The whole accessory dwelling unit thing, we spent a ton of time in something like 2007 about how to make this work. So why aren't people doing it? And I don't want to get on, that internal soapbox, but if we're going to look at what we can do with what we have, and then more broadly, how we interface with our region, our states, and our, I want to say this carefully, beyond, how do we do that in a sustainable fashion?
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, I think, so those are good points. And I think we can see some of the topics around a land use group. Can we bite off enough? I mean, we can bite off just the interest is all it takes. If we've got 3 people that say, this is my thing, I want to dig into it, then part of your charter is defining the order at which you're going to do that, the questions that come up, how do you nest it in regional issues, all these things would be that group's part of their work to define.
Can we get, if we could get Rod's, and I know we were presented with it, Ernie, because of the packets, I didn't keep it all. I just went back to the packets, but I would like to get a copy of what Rod was suggesting for new zoning districts. as a basis.
I believe I saw something with that kind of a title in one of the screen captures that Pam showed me. So yes, I think that kind of thing was available. Yeah. So let's try and parse it out here and say, okay, what kind of direction do we need to give? I got Ernie, I got Stuart. I'm pretty sure Jeff's gonna not be able to avoid it. That are saying, and please, Vince, Bob, anybody, but if we've got Bob, you're up for it?
Yeah, I definitely.
Then you don't need me on that. I'll just be an advisor.
All right.
Bob, Ernie, and Stu.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you need for mandate charter statement or do you want to go off and chew on it for a couple sessions and then come back with a few possible avenues to go at? What do you think?
I think we should try to come to a little bit of a consensus between, whoever's on the subcommittee about at least we want to start with and go from there. Another thing that from my point of view is all of this stuff is sort of ongoing. It really, the town, I don't know if it's just this town or if it's every town or it's state or what, seems to have this idea that, every few years we're going to just revise all the regulations and then have, we're going to change because everything's got to change. But the thing is that it's a lot more organic than that. We shouldn't be just changing the whole thing just to change it. What we should be doing is changing what we need to change. Real legislatures do that. They don't just change the entire Constitution just because, it's time. You know what I'm saying? They don't change even the laws. They just change the laws that need to be changed. If they can come to this.
That was my point about what problem are we trying to solve, Ernie? That we said, we look and say, hey, 80% of this is okay, or certainly isn't burning the house down. What are the chunks that need work and what are the problems we're trying to solve?
Right. So, I mean, my first thing, which is, is how do we sort of keep this town livable, environmentally sound? How do we, go along with what the one survey, the number one topic that people were interested in was climate change. And whether you believe in it or not, that was what the majority of the townspeop had an interest in. And also, how do you accommodate, combating climate change in a town, and how do you make, and what do you do with that? Because it's just one town, whereas the next towns around it might not give a damn about climate change. How do you tie all this stuff together? So it to me seems like all of that would be one, for instance, that would be one subject, one piece to talk about sustainability. Yeah, that would tie into sustainability. So would forest blocks, so would number of houses, the whole 9 yards all ties in together. It's a pretty holistic thing, and we have to.
I think it has to be in a sense. So are we talking the land use subcommittee or growth and development, or you pick another name? I
call it land use subcommittee because they can disagree with me, but I think that's the best overall catch-all kind of term.
Okay. Jeff?
Yeah, like the solar group, Jan, I would just say, let Bob and Stu and Ernie kibitz, and whether it's 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever, they come back and say, this is what we're thinking. And if they need our input, they can refine it. We don't really need to provide more input at this point.
Right, at this point, but I agree, and I think, but what we want to do is, at some point, we will want sometime sooner or later to use it, and this is a good segue into the next agenda item around soliciting input from other groups, is that how do we use these to increase participation? And so, for example, if we're doing a postmortem on solar sighting up front, then we may open it up and get input from a broader group quickly in that side. Land use, it may be a more internal thing, and then it's a little later that you open it up for different questions. But we need to look for opportunities to increase participation. Ernie?
I think that we should use something like a business way of doing this, which is a working name until we come up with, a better definition. So calling it land use just as a working name for now, for instance, might be suitable until the actual subcommittee decides. But so that, because you need to be able to, and it really has to do with OML and just how, you can sort of refer to something until it gets formalized,
You can't change the name on Pam every time you have a meeting. That's just not fair in terms of notifications and minutes and so forth. Jeff?
Yeah, so like we did with the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, and this evolved over a whole bunch of time. I'm wondering if something about the minutes tonight says we're standing up these initial two subcommittees, and the Planning Commission is interested in the participation of others. And so it can either be folks saying, I want to be a part of that subcommittee, or at this juncture, I was thinking about the Affordable Housing Subcommittee. I think we only have one Planning Commission member on that now. But still members of the public show up and participate with the Affordable Housing Subcommittee. So maybe we just cast that net and say, hey, folks, and I can name names for butters in the solar context for folks that may want to be there. But I don't mean to be flip when I say this, but if we want to, what's the right word? Just put a glitzy ad out there, starting with Route 5 South, and we're going to get a lot of people involved in that. And I am being flip.
I hear you. I'm wondering whether we're ready to open the door wide, and I guess I would leave that up to the subcommittees, in the sense that the minutes will reflect that we set them up, that we intend to use to invite public participation, and as those groups define their work and charter over the coming weeks, they will then say, because I don't want to spend the next month with 12 volunteers from the public trying to sort out what the committees are doing with 15 people chiming in. So we definitely intend to do that, but I would like to give the small groups of commission members a chance to meet a couple of times to say how they want to engage the public. Chris?
So I want to go back to, I'm going to completely agree with you, Jan. And historically, I'm going to just give you my own one brief personal point. I really happily lived under a rock in this town for many years. And it was the Route 5 South thing that, as soon as I heard that the Planning Commission was getting involved in this kind of stuff, my hairs went up, and a lot of other people do. And suddenly you've got everybody in town. I guess I personally believe, and this is, again, my own philosophy, is I believe in incrementalism, and I believe in not getting the town worked up. And if there's any town that can get worked up, it's this town. So it's sort of, to me, like, I like the idea that we're just calling this sort of organic and holistically kind of like as our plan, as this new planning commission is working, I kind of want to make sure that we're not really raising hairs with people and saying, oh yeah, we're going to, we're looking at development and all this. It's almost like the way we present this is that we're, how do I say it? Just cleaning it. I kind of like the idea of saying we haven't even cleaned house on language yet. Or, the solar sighting thing is real. It was a real problem because some neighbors, even though they had every right to build that, the neighbors clearly had problems with the language. They had a problem because the town let them down. The planning, I wouldn't call it necessarily the planning commission, but clearly there were things that they thought were protecting them, including a ridge line. And to me, that's a very real problem. And so I really want to support you in where you say, let's not create more problems and suddenly, have people thinking that this planning commission is going to run amok with all kinds of new ideas that it is sort of.
Yeah, I think the message, and Vince, this is yours to craft somewhat in the minutes, but the message is that this group wants to incrementally solve problems. We're not absolutely going to clean sheet and rewriting everything and assuming that, because that'll just get everything riled up unnecessarily. We are incrementally prioritizing the things that need attention first, and we are soliciting input from other town groups and residents to make sure that we're prioritizing the things that matter the most to the town and work on them. That's the message. Stuart and then Jeff. And then,
I'm wanting to agree with what you just said, Jan, and raise a further cautionary note. When I look at question 7 on the 2018 survey, it says, how do you view the quality of life in Norwich compared to past times? 57% of the people, 474 people answered this question. 57% said it's staying about the same, and 9% said it's getting better. You add those two numbers together, and I think that we should be careful about how dramatic we want to be and how far-reaching we want to be in what we're going to be doing. And I grant what Bob has said is that these surveys are not very numerically specific in terms of how things are defined, but you can see a general trend, in both of these questions that I've cited, both question 6 and question 7, where you have a bunch of people, a majority, 54, 55%, who said they like things, population growth about where it is. And this other question, which says, how's the quality of life? If 57% of the people and say it's staying about the same, and 9% say it's getting better, I think we need to be cautious about how we exercise our authority and how we exercise our recommendations. And so I'm just saying, walk cautiously.
yeah, I think we're getting that message, and then I do want to move on in a minute, Jeff, but if you want to.
Yeah, so a couple things. So when this question came out a while ago, I asked my largely agrarian family about their thoughts, and not one member said it was getting better. In fact, nearly every single member of my family said, I can't afford to live here now. So to the extent you're a local, you can't live here. So if you're not a local, sure, it's getting a lot better, I guess. And I appreciate Elisa's presence in the audience, but my perspective is very different as one who's got roots here for centuries. Having said that, back to where Chris commented about what let the neighbors down, if you will. So the Planning Commission made a decision about the town plan, and the Select Board made the same decision. Whatever that decision was what it was. And that resulted in what happened to the neighbors, in Upper Loveland, if you will. Let down. So to the extent there's a let down question, what is it that was let down? And that maybe guides the subcommittee going forward. I think with respect to living under a rock, and I want to follow this up with Chris, because in the mid 90s, when the rules were very different statewide and nationally, the Planning Commission had two subcommittees that were suggesting substantially more growth than what happened in the late 2018, 19, et cetera. The rules were entirely different. The subcommittees, and it was well received by the public, were advocating growth along the infrastructure corridors of Route 5 South and Route 5 North. And there wasn't substantial public opposition to that. When, to a different point, which I think has been made here tonight, it's about how you message this. When the planning commission's, when the town manager engaged a consultant, Brandy Saxton, Rod Francis partner, Space Sense, I'm sorry. And she said 350 acres on Route 5 South. That is what's in the document, but it's false. 350 acres cannot be built. So the planning commission failed to vet what was buildable. I'm not trying to undermine what Brandy did, because in some ways, I think what she did was good to say, to the extent we're thinking about clustering, thinking about infrastructure, how do we do that? And if you actually parse her report, if you look at the rules as they existed then and even now, I don't know if it accommodates 40 or 70 acres. So the messaging problem, I understand when the public says, here's from the planning commission, we're going to rezone 350 acres for development on Route 5 South. That's not good messaging, especially when it's not true.
Yeah.
So looking forward, to the extent we're talking about, maybe it's where are the parcels, where are the places, where's the infrastructure? Let's think about framing it accurately.
Yeah. Okay. Let us take that. I think we have what I was asking for at the beginning, which is we have two subcommittees who are going to help define their own charters and come back to us, but we know enough about what we're calling them and doing with them. I just wanted to report back, and like I said, I went through this before. I did the first, I sort of used the chair's prerogative and sent out a quick message to Marcia Patrick, his last name escapes me, chair of the DRB. I'll go to Arlene to get some background as well on DRB, and then Nancy Osgood from the Historic Society. And just to say, we're going to be open to these. We want to get input about their priorities. Nancy, I see, is joining us. And they had a meeting this afternoon. So the point is, we want to be asking for their input. I did get a message back from Marcia where she said she was planning to put on the select board agenda for the 23rd of August to talk about interaction with the PC and how the select board and the PC could work together. So that's a broad topic that we just want to be open to, and then how do we use our subcommittees to engage with these other groups and so forth. And Nancy, I don't know if you wanted to say anything from your meeting this afternoon or today.
Yes, I'd be happy to. And just to clarify, I'm not speaking for the Historical Society, but rather the Historic Preservation Commission,
Yeah.
of which I'm chair. And we were very grateful for your email, and we would love to work with you. And yes, we do have some concerns about zoning and the permitting processes as they are now written. Brian Loeb, for a while, when he was on your planning commission, attended to some of our meetings, and he and Jess Phelps, who's a member of our commission, were going to work together to, try to craft some ideas. Our next meeting is going to be on September 28th at 9 o'clock at the Norwich Historical Society, and it will be a virtual meeting, and we will be discussing our ideas about zoning and permitting process as far as it regards historic preservation. So we invite your participation and look forward to working with you on all these matters of concern. So thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Nancy. And we will meet before that. So I will make sure that we have a representative to your meeting on the 28th.
That would be wonderful. Thank you. I'll send you the agenda. Of course, it
All
will
right.
be public too. So
Yep.
thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And then we should all be, we can think about it, but we will meet, usually we're meeting the day before the select board. So I assume our next meeting is the Tuesday before the select board's 23rd meeting. So we can talk about that a little bit and then participate with them But that is, for starters, the select board talking primarily within the select board about how they want to do this, and then we'll come in after that. Linda, did you have something to add?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to suggest two other town groups that you might want to invite to try to consult with. That includes the Conservation Commission and the Energy Committee.
Yes, yeah. The first ones that I went to were just the first ones that I had contact information. I've been talking with a member of the Conservation Commission who lives up the street, and Energy Committee clearly needs to be involved when we're talking solar siting and energy plans. So, and there were several others on the full list, but yes, we would be inclusive of all of those. Same message. We want to be working on what's the most important to the town. Okay. I do want to get to a little bit of time on the job description and the hiring. So if we can jump to that just a second, Vince.
I just want to kind of circle back to the zoning regulation subcommittees. There's a section about ADUs and multifamily. Is that something that we're assuming could be part of that second group that we talked about, or is that something that we could talk about?
I think, to my understanding, I put those on the agenda as topics that I knew were of interest. I would say that the first two bullets there, we managed to define and birth, and the second ones, this third and fourth, we did not. But certainly, to Jeff's point, the how do you increase density in what districts, and might you do that with ADUs and multifamily, would roll up into land use, and obviously the regs and clarity and so forth is going to come up in all of any reg we touch. We're going to want to clarify. So I think for the minutes, just focus on the two subcommittees that we identified, and the other things are not as defined or chartered at this point. Chris?
So again, going back to a more administrative organizational question. So we've now created these two subcommittees. And there, Ernie, this is sort of a two-part question. Ernie, you just finished telling us that you're really busy, but you put yourself on both committees. Are you committed to that?
Well, I'm not sure it's the best idea at all, but I sort of was pushed into it, I think. I mean, I'm going to focus on the one with, the land use and planning, to be honest.
Okay. So,
Well, and I think that may mean, Chris,
You can count on me to discuss with, since it is solar power and so on is something that I have spent, much of my engineering time studying and even working with. So
You got something to contribute.
so
it may mean,
that.
Chris, also that we decide fairly quickly to bring in a few townspeople or other does the Conservation Commission or the Energy Committee or do we augment the group with people from outside the commission sooner than later?
right, and that's what I was going to get at. And so here's my organizational question. At that point, since we're now a subcommittee, and this is again purely an organizational question, are we now allowed at this point? So let's say we end this meeting, and so it's you, me, and Jan, you and myself, and partially Ernie for a time. Can we now at that point just email each other, or is there still OML stuff we have to? How do we now go from 8, when we close this meeting today to now, how do we start?
Yeah. Jeff, if you can clarify any OML stuff, the policy is going to be we're following the rules. We just need clarification on how those rules apply. And I would put a second question for the organization because it's a good one. We've now created these clubs, so to speak. Are the clubs themselves empowered now to invite other members? without coming back to the whole commission. Because I want to be clear about that, so that if the energy solar siting group goes off and says, oh man, we need help, and then we come back next month to the planning commission and say, hey, we just let these 8 people join our group. What are we empowered to do or not to do? Jeff?
Yeah, so a couple things. So my suggestion to the subcommittees would be pick a chair, a leader, a scribe, a clerk, whatever the words are. So anyway, to that extent, the group of 3 needs to advertise like the planning commission does. Here's what we're going to do. And then holds the meeting in a public sense, whether it's via Zoom or sitting around this table or sitting around Ernie's coffee table. It doesn't matter. It can be a place designated. As far as the communication between the 3, it's entirely reasonable to have the 3 say, where are we going to meet? How are we going to do this kind of thing? But that discussion shouldn't be based on what are we going to do? What's our policy? What are we thinking? Like what we're doing is a matter of keeping everything open and above board. To the extent someone CCs any other member of the planning commission, now it's a violation of the open meeting law. So if you think about, here's the 3 core folks that we have, we're going to just coordinate how we're going to meet, where we're going to meet. That's all fine. And then publicly advertise it and do it. And to the extent those 3 folks say, we want to add this person or that person, those people need to be brought back to the planning commission to be appointed to the subcommittee.
Okay.
So the subcommittees don't have the ability to assimilate like the Borg. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. And then
No, I think that's my question. I think that's an important question. So I think
Me too.
the policy to restate is, and that's the open meeting law, which is you can talk, the members talk to set up an agenda and a meeting place and agree on that. And then other than that, the business of the public is done in the warned meeting and treated. So that doesn't change. And the second piece is that only the full commission can appoint people to subcommittees to be official members. So, but that may still mean, Chris, that the solar siting folks say, okay, we think we need 3 or 4 more members. Let's beat the bushes a little bit. And that's one of the things we're going to do pretty early is come back to the planning commission with some candidates.
Right. And just to again, to go through this, the meeting is, again, the 3 of us, we've got the agenda. Let's say we're meeting in the conference room upstairs or whatever space. And then we just have that conversation. And it is because we've notified the public. There is, the whole public comment thing, and they can come in and chat it up with us and do all that stuff. And we take notes and then submit it to Pam and
yeah, but there is quite a bit of leeway in terms of how much, what the meeting feels like, whether the chair's got to call on people before they speak, all that kind of stuff is discretionary. You can
relaxed,
quite informal if the group so chooses.
Right.
Okay. Stuart, and then let's move to the job description.
So I want to return for a minute to what Jeff said, because I think it was important. His family's been here for generations. I'm a short timer. I've only been here about 40 years. But what I've seen over the 40 years is the departure of farmers, the departure of blue collar workers, the departure of single parents. They can't afford to live here. So I'm agreeing with what Jeff said. All of this has been at least partly driven, I think mainly driven by market forces, which we don't control specifically in this town. And yes, we have become a gated community. We have become a bedroom community as well. The question is, what can we, and this goes back to the central question of land planning, what can we or should we do to change those things or affect those things? And I mean, some of the groups of people that I've just cited who have left, they were my friends. They couldn't afford to live here anymore. And I bemoan that. And I would love to see it change. Now, how to make it change it's not an easy task. So we do have a pretty challenging task in front of us. And I know that you guys are wanting to tackle it. So let's,
Right,
Let's-
so that, yeah, and I think to your point, it is, you got to be realistic about what levers, what we can do. You know, there's no point in beating our heads against the wall trying to do something we don't have influence over. But that is the challenge to these subcommittees, is to bound your topic so that you can be successful to the right size.
that's what I've said. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I would like to be able to move forward on a job description. And I think the way we left it before, because at the very end of the last meeting, Jeff said that he had talked to Ernie about the job description that we had in the packet in a previous meeting. And so that reflected the thinking of both of them. And so the question to the group now is, do we want to push to change the posted job description? Are we taking essentially the second version? Really it's a zoning administrator job description compared to a planning director job description, which simplistically in terms of responsibilities, as I read it, is someone who does DRB and permitting assistance primary, and planning commission support secondary, and then town manager, or when you get a few minutes free. That is the order, which if you look at the currently posted planning director position, the first 8 bullets of work are all planning commission. It's rewrite the town regs, do the zoning, do the plan, work with the regional commission to redo the plan. You know, literally the first 8 or 9 bullets are all planning commission. So it's the other way around. And so does this group want to advocate for changing the posted job description? Jeff?
Yes, sirree.
We could just vote on it. I'll even take a motion if you want. And if we've got a job description in a packet, if somebody wants to move to empower the chair to work with the town manager to change the posted job description, then move it and we'll talk about it.
I'm sorry, the description was in the previous packet.
It was 2 meetings, wasn't
I
it?
think it's 2 meetings ago, there was a zoning administrator. If we can pull it up, or we can sort of describe it. It really, Bob, is that distinction between,
Okay, if it
you
was.
call it a more senior person or a more junior person, but it was really the priority between those 3 tasks. Senior staff for the planning commission, DRB assistance, and zoning permitting assistance. And what is posted right now is a planning director that does planning commission staff first and the other 2 second. And the zoning administrator job description that we're talking about and people are advocating for flips those.
Hey, Jan, can I ask, given the rate at which I know Vince and Bob will assimilate stuff, can you call up the one that's posted and put it on the screen?
Yes, just a second.
And then follow it up with the one that's that we're suggesting, but that Ernie and I were suggesting.
Yeah, just give me a second. And if you want, I mean, if somebody wants to make a motion,
I'll make a motion to advocate, I don't know whatever the right words are for the motion, to advocate changing the job description.
Second.
Can you be specific about what you want to change it to, if you could?
So replace the existing job description with either the one that we've presented previously for last year or so, or some facsimile thereof.
Don't you have to say something like title change, that you're changing the title?
I think the new job description covers that, but we're talking about a zoning administrator job description, not a planning director job description.
No, but
So
I'm just saying in your motion.
That's fine. So in addition to changing the job description, change it to a zoning administrator.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
So Ernie's got it, I think with Bob, so.
Okay, somebody's got it to show. I have them both on my screen. I'm just working on multiple monitors, being confused about what to share.
Page 146.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so this is the, yeah,
Yeah.
all right, yep.
You're looking at something there, Bob?
Yeah, 146 from the packet. from
Page
the,
146 out of
13th,
154.
Yeah,
That's the new description, right?
the new,
The zoning administrator description.
I didn't know if a new one had come up in the last week, but or a couple weeks. All right.
Okay, so we have a motion. Are people people comfortable knowing what they're talking about, and we can discuss that? Any discussion of that motion? Stuart?
I'm sorry, I have to abstain. I just don't know it well enough and I haven't reviewed it. So no point in my agreeing or disagreeing when I haven't read it.
Do other people feel that way? Do we need to give people around to look at this? We're going to meet again in 2 weeks. We can table the motion for 2 weeks and make it so everybody's clear on what they're talking about.
I'm glad to withdraw the motion, Jan, if folks want to wait 2 weeks.
I'm fine with, I mean, again, I've read it and I think it's a great idea. So I'm all for changing it.
Yeah, I think I personally haven't, what I would propose then is I would like to talk to Brennan specifically. I sent him something that said we'd be discussing it and we would conceivably be advocating for changing it, but I haven't had a back and forth with him enough to feel to get his feedback on that. I guess I would propose to put both copies, both the job descriptions into the packet for the next meeting. We're meeting in 2 weeks, and be prepared to move it and act on it first thing in that meeting. Ernie?
I withdraw my motion.
All right, thank you, Jeff.
I just have to say, I'm troubled by I'm troubled by involving the town manager in what is our perquisite. This is, we keep on ending up with hirelings that know nothing about the town, know nothing about Vermont, and so on. When we should actually have, somebody like Kyle might actually be preferable because he's actually grew up here and knows something about the place, or something like that. I'm not entirely trusting of our town manager form of government to handle something like this properly. They haven't yet.
So I don't disagree necessarily, Ernie, but I think the one thing I will say is that when I talked to Brennan about staffing issues in general, he was clear that in his mind, he said it, the activity of hiring planning and zoning staff was different for him and his involvement than, say, hiring DPW staff. That he clearly acknowledged that the statutes and the position of the planning commission was different and entitled us to participation and to a different role in the hiring of that staff. So, which I believe is true, and it is good that he acknowledged that. That said, it's clear that we are in a town manager form of government. We have an interim town manager who is on a somewhat tight leash relative to the select board in terms of hiring decisions. So we need to work within that. But it is different in terms of the statutes that relate to planning commission staff. Jeff?
Yeah, sort of 2 points of order, Jan. If we're going to put it on the next agenda, then let's have this conversation at our next meeting.
Yes.
Yeah. The second point of order, I don't really care for the word hireling. So I just want to help us encourage one another in our language, and I need all the help I can get.
All right. So I think let's take that, let's put it front and center on the next meeting. We'll put both job descriptions in the packet. I will have a background conversation with both Marcia and Brennan, and we'll be prepared to move. And I would urge, because the other piece of this conversation, as it says, if it doesn't say, it should say in the agenda, is how do we help speed this up? What do we do? What do we push? To Bob Gear's point at the end of the last meeting, how do we light a fire under this? Because the level of advertising has dwindled to almost nothing. Let's use a change in the job description to reinvigorate this and really make this happen. So that is the second part of the conversation, is everybody's ideas for making this happen. Chris?
Just a quick question. Is it actually posted right now as is?
It is posted on the Norwich website and on the VCLT website. The advertising we did in the Valley News and the Burlington Free Press and LinkedIn and so forth have all died away and have not been redone. So it is minimally posted.
So, but if somebody who actually came in and looked at that, is there going to be a conflict if there's a sort of a switch that, just, I don't know what the chances are, somebody coming in 2 weeks. I mean, I'm just wondering if.
I'll notify, Brennan made it clear that he would tell me whenever we had any candidates show up. So, but I'll notify him and he'll see the minutes come out in a few days. So yeah, it's a low likelihood, but if we have to juggle that transition, then my guess is the candidates are going to be fuzzy enough in their qualifications that we just want to make clear what we're expecting them to do so that we don't have trouble, when they're hired.
Well, the only reason I bring this up is I just happened to read the minutes of the special select board meeting. And Marcia kind of brought up the idea of switching to a town administrator position. And all of a sudden, Roger suddenly says, well, it's a bait and switch. We've already got an advertisement out for town manager, and then they're going to find out we're switching to an so not that it was actually going to happen, but it makes me concerned that, again, if we're advertising right now for a planning director and somebody comes in and says, well, now you guys are switching on me again, I'm just wondering if if they should just take it down for a while.
I'll check. I'll think about it. I'll check with Brennan and Marcia. My guess is that we can make it clear within a few days so that if somebody checks in, they'll at least be told that that's in a state of flux and they should stay tuned. Jeff?
Yeah, well, I might agree with Chris. It's been such a popular advertisement. I don't really care if it stays up.
Yeah, I'm not worried about 6 candidates knocking down the door in the next week. So I think we're okay. Okay, so that's fine for that. Can we get some discussion on the minutes of July 20th?
Motion to approve the minutes from 7:25.
Okay, second. All right.
I just have a few typos I'd like to hand to Vince. It's like past tense, and so it's nothing really.
Yeah.
So,
okay, so those, I had one relatively substantive on page 2, just where you said 2/3 of the way down the page, Vince Laspress stated he'd been in discussions with Peter Gregory to review town zoning regs. That the only thing that was when Jeff and I got that little proposal from Peter that Jackie had solicited. So I would ask to just strike that sentence that I did not have that conversation with Peter Gregory.
But I can see how that could be misconstrued. Yeah.
Yeah. So just delete that sentence. I'm fine. And Stuart, I think you had one.
Yeah, I did. I wanted to change the last sentence where I'm quoted and I can send this to you, Vince, so you don't have.
Was that what you said earlier today?
He referenced two surveys. In other words, I referenced two surveys that stated that more than 50% of respondents like the current town population to stay about as it is or decrease.
Hey, that sounds
Shall I
good.
send that to you?
I already got that from you earlier.
You did, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
That sounds good. And I will add that change.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other amendments to the minutes? All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, unanimous, thank you. Thank you, Vince. Do we have public comment on anything to close the meeting?
The only thing I would say is it's fabulous to sit here with you guys. This is a breath of fresh air. I'm enjoying every moment.
All
Thank you
right,
so
at this point, we do it every 2 weeks. You're welcome to join us. We probably will, you'll have your pick of subcommittees and then you can do it even more if you want.
Thanks.
All right, Stuart?
So before we adjourn, I'd just like to revert back to the notion that it would be good for all correspondence to be
Oh, yeah.
included in the agenda, regardless of whether it comes from the public or whether it comes from a planning commissioner. So I'd like.
I don't disagree. I guess I'm not sure, again, back to my question about what problem are we solving? Are you saying that
Problem,
putting the things that you sent under the agenda item, if it includes the email and so forth, there's something wrong with that method? I took correspondence to be the catch-all bucket for things that were not included in an agenda item.
so I don't object if you reference within the agenda under the particular subject, the correspondence.
Right.
But to leave it out totally, to me, is kind of burying it.
Okay. No, I think you're right. It was what was missing this time, and actually 2 meetings ago, I remember, because I put it in blue on the agenda in brackets, which things in the packet were linked to which agenda items. So if we take that as a policy, so then in this case, under town plan growth and development, it would have referenced town survey, septic survey, ... and then people would have said, oh, that sounds interesting. They go to the packet and they look at it.
Terrific.
Okay, all right. So that's the way we'll work. I will work that with Pam going forward. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you all. Good night.
Good night.